Let's bring in Ed O'Keefe and Melanie Zanona in our Washington bureau. Ed is a CBS News political contributor and congressional reporter for The Washington Post. And Melanie also covers Congress for The Hill. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having me.
Melanie, let me start with you. What did you hear in the vice president's comments on Monday about the end of U.S. strategic patience?
Well, it was a very powerful image, seeing the vice president standing in the DMZ between North and South Korea and delivering this strong warning to North Korea. But I think his message is still a little unclear, and the overall strategy is still a little unclear at this point. When Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, was pressed on this issue earlier today, he said it means ending the wait-and-see approach of his predecessor, former President Barack Obama, but declined to offer details about what options are on the table, and saying Trump is likely to hold his cards close to his vest. So I think we don't know a lot right now, other than they are hinging on China as an ally to help put pressure on North Korea and resolve some of these issues.
Ed, what about you? What did you hear in the vice president's comments?
Oh, I think he's just conveying what the president and other officials have said, which is that this era of strategic patience is over, and that is a signal to the Koreans that they need to start thinking more seriously about what exactly it is that they're doing. This is a trip that will take the vice president elsewhere in Asia. But it was a pretty dramatic first day for him. He's actually up at this hour in South Korea meeting with business leaders before the trip continues. But a pretty dramatic image there to see him and his family go right up to the DMZ and inspect the North Korean side, and to make those comments there at the footsteps of North Korea. Obviously, as has been reported elsewhere, China's not very pleased about all of this. They're looking for sort of the rhetoric to be toned down. But clearly, Pence there trying to make it clear to the region and to the world, tying the Korean situation out of what happened in Syria a few days ago and that mother of all bombs that was dropped in Afghanistan last week as well, sort of tying them all together and saying, if you don't believe us, go talk to the Syrians and to ISIS in Afghanistan. We mean business, and we'll do it here. The problem is, of course, if they do something in South Korea, then what? And that is a bigger much more ominous question that has to be answered, because there really has no script for what exactly would happen next, given if the United States were to attack somehow.
Melanie, let me ask you, lawmakers from both parties criticized the Trump administration for its lack of unity on a position in Syria. You discussed the mixed signals you think that are coming from the Trump administration when it comes to North Korea. Is there, though, at least sort of an overarching thread that seems to be somewhat more unified when you look at what the administration is saying about North Korea versus what we heard about Syria?
Well, that's right. And we've heard some of his Republican critics even come out in recent weeks, especially last week after the military action we saw, and be supportive of him. Some of the defense hawks like Lindsey Graham in the Senate and John McCain, and even the Democrats' response was kind of demurred. But I think when it comes to the strategy here with North Korea, there's still a lot we don't know about their plans. Trump himself said, I'm not going to be telegraphing what I do. I'm not one of those leaders who say I'm going to do something and then 4 weeks do it. So I think there are still a lot of questions in Congress, and I'm sure when they get back to work next week, this is going to be the top of everyone's minds and questions.
Well, Ed, let me ask you, the North Korea situation has forced President Trump to ease off some campaign promises of a harsh stance toward China. Most notably, he backed off his pledge to punitively label China a currency manipulator. Do you think his base, Ed, cares about those reversals?
No, not necessarily. I know Democrats are infuriated by it. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer for years has been pushing the Obama administration to label China as a currency manipulator, and there are lawmakers across the Midwest who've seen the manufacturing sector suffer because of what China has done with its economy, very upset by this. But overall, I don't think it's necessarily going to be something that's top of mind with most of his supporters across the country. It is pretty telling, though, that we see him doing this, making some changes, of course, in his views towards Syria and a host of other things. And I think collectively, if at some point it is seen by the country that he is essentially flip-flopping on what he promised to do, then it will become a bigger issue for him, especially given that in the first 4 months of the year he's been unable to really deliver anything besides a Supreme Court nominee, a very conservative one, which he promised. If we go a few more weeks or months without any other big wins, especially legislatively on Capitol Hill, I suspect you'll see Democrats, maybe even some of his Republican colleagues, start to make the argument that he's not keeping those promises that he had made last year.
Melanie, what do you think?
Well, I would agree with Ed that, you know, he's earned some goodwill with the conservative base, you know, the Supreme Court justice, as well as, I would say, approving the Keystone Pipeline, rolling back Obama-era regulations. So the voters have been willing to give him a little leeway, especially when it comes to some of these issues. And now with North Korea, as anxiety is mounting, I think that they are going to be willing to let him take the lead. And if he says China is the key to some of these negotiations and to resolving some of these issues, you know, I think they'll be willing to let him reverse on some of these policy positions that he's taken in the past.
I want to turn to another topic here. The White House moved to keep its visitor logs under wraps. This is how, Ed, your paper, The Washington Post, describes it. Quote, Trump finds himself on the defensive on a pair of government transparency issues. Much of the outcry has come from journalists and from watchdog groups. Ed, help us understand why Americans should care about access to White House visitor logs.
Sure. Well, look, this is something that the Obama administration did after a few years of grappling with how exactly to do it, and after some lawsuits by various government transparency groups. Essentially what they would do is every few months, usually on a Friday afternoon when we were all starting to think about the weekend, release a list of thousands of names of people who had visited the White House for various reasons, whether it was lobbyists to talk with administration officials about a policy change, or lawmakers, or others who were coming to visit the president. There were exceptions for things like whether he was interviewing somebody perhaps to sit on the Supreme Court, or if he was having a private meeting with a family friend. That wasn't released. But the reason we want to see this is to get a better sense of who exactly this administration is talking to as it puts together the changes it wants to make. That was the argument back when it was done during the Obama years, and that is the argument that's being made this time by liberal groups and by conservative groups. Remember, Judicial Watch, a group that's been a thorn in the side of every president since the Clintons and is more conservative in nature, is among those suing to get its hands on these records. And the reason is they want to know, is the president keeping his promise to not employ or be influenced by lobbyists? Who exactly is coming to the White House to talk about making those big changes to places like the Labor Department or the EPA? Are there any other people perhaps associated in some way with the investigations regarding Russia's involvement in the elections who somehow stopped by the White House? And all those other people who support the president in one way or another, when and how often are they coming to the White House to meet either with him or with his advisors? Some have argued that, you know, this isn't done for members of Congress. They don't release their schedules and who they meet with. I'd argue we should see that as well. But the way federal laws are written when it comes to transparency and openness, it applies more to the White House, and it should continue. It helps us better understand, taxpayers better understand, who exactly is talking to your government, when and why.
Melanie, let me ask you a little bit more about this. How does this move by the White House comport with the president's promise to, quote unquote, drain the swamp?
Well, I would point out also that it was President Trump who ran on a campaign platform of transparency. In fact, he even blasted President Obama on Twitter back in 2013, saying he wasn't transparent. So it does seem to not match up with his own rhetoric and his own pledge to drain the swamp and to be more transparent. Now, whether voters, especially his supporters, will actually care on this issue, I think is another question. I mean, most people probably didn't even know these logs existed. So to think that a supporter or even someone on the fence would be, you know, willing to change their opinion based on this issue alone, I don't think is necessarily going to happen. But it could speak to a broader problem of transparency for the administration.
Right.
Elaine, for example, most recently, most immediately, remember there are all those questions about when and how the House Intelligence Committee Chairman Dan Nunes got into the White House. If those records were being released within a few weeks, we would know, because it would essentially show up there in the visitors' logs. And if it didn't, then there certainly would be questions about how exactly he was allowed in. So those are the reasons we want to know this stuff. And not only do journalists and taxpayers perhaps want to know this, but there may be, in the case of the Russia situation, you know, an investigatory reason why they want to know who exactly is coming and going from the White House.
Yeah, all right. Good perspective and good context for our viewers there. Meantime, I also want to ask you both about voters in Georgia. They're going to be deciding Tuesday whom they want to replace HHS Secretary Tom Price in Congress. What is at stake in that race, Melanie?
Well, for Democrats, they are desperately trying to flip this House seat, and they want it to be a referendum on Trump. You know, they're excited about this backlash to the effort to repeal Obamacare. They're looking at Trump's low approval ratings, and they think they might have a chance here. We've even seen some celebrities donating to this campaign for the Democratic side. Chelsea Handler, a comedian, came out on Twitter encouraging people to go vote. But on the flip side, we have President Trump, who wants to show that he does still have support in this district that he barely carried over Hillary Clinton. And he wants to tamp down concerns that he's going to be dragging down the GOP in the midterm elections. So for both sides, there's a lot at stake here.
Ed, what do you think?
Look, this is a district that's been held by Republicans since the 1980s. Newt Gingrich held it once before he was Speaker, and as he was Speaker, the current senator from Georgia, Johnny Isakson, held it as well. It is a suburban Republican district in Georgia. I spent the 2014 midterm elections down there when Democrats were convinced that they'd win the State House back or that Michelle Nunn would win the Senate seat. They came up short by double digits in the Senate race, they came up short in the governor's race as well. Last year, Democrats were convinced that they could somehow eke out a win in Georgia. It didn't happen. The only way it happens tomorrow for Democrats is if the Republican side is so splintered that somehow this top Democratic candidate, Jon Ossoff, wins more than 50%. Tomorrow is his best chance at winning this district. If he ends up in a runoff with one Republican, when all the other Republicans unite behind that Republican, it would probably follow that he will lose that race, maybe be able to garner something in the 40s and get it close. But there just isn't enough of a Democratic base in that district, and frankly, enough Democratic organization across Georgia to make it happen. And if he wins, it's a real dangerous sign for Republicans going into next year that if somehow Democrats can flip districts that they've held for 30 years, they've got their work cut out for them across the country in all sorts of districts that Republicans have been able to hold on to over the last several decades.
Yeah, the Democrat Jon Ossoff facing a very crowded field, 11 Republicans in that contest. Ed O'Keefe and Melanie Zanona in Washington, thanks to you both for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Take care, Elaine.